Unlike service design and product design, where usability and market viability is the important things to measure success, here in critical inquiry, it's more of a perspective thing, whether a designer is able to shift the perspective in the target audience. So, Reynard, product innovation is kind of a broad term, and some people will say that everything we do in design is already innovation. So, what exactly is it that characterizes the product innovation specialization, and why do you do it?
So when it comes to characterizing product innovation, I think the key word here is more about the word innovation than it is the word product. Generally speaking, because pretty much anything that you do, you touch or you see or you hold or use can be considered a product in some sense. So the main part is more about the innovation. How do we innovate within a certain field? How do we look at problems from a different perspective so that we can then bring in new ways to solve those problems? So I think that is how I would categorize it. And in terms of why did I do it, I've always felt a strong connection to like products in general, because as I mentioned before, pretty much anything you use or hold is a product, right? So there's a lot of chances where these feelings when you use the product tends to become very personal to you. And I guess it's also because that I really like to innovate, at least try to think of new ideas or look at things from different perspectives, so that when it comes to solving a problem or looking at a exploratory type project, it's a very different viewpoint and you tend to see things that you don't really see or notice before. But yeah, pretty much that's it.
I do agree that product innovation seems like the most hands-on specialization.
So you mentioned something about innovation being pretty much the biggest part about product design.
Yep.
So when it comes to innovation, how do you make sure that it's meaningful and not just like novel for novelty's sake?
So I mean, for context, there's two types of projects you may see in the specialization. So the first one is more about the problem solving or problem centric kind of projects where people try to solve a certain problem or situation that they might have observed in the first place. The second type is more about an exploration type of project where people do look into a certain topic that they're interested in, dive deeply into it and see if there's any type of value that can be created from that exploration. So in terms of how to make sure that it's not novel for novelty's sake, generally it's more about prototyping and making, because there's a lot of things that we don't really know until we actually make it out. For example, in the case of problem-centric projects, we need the voices of the people that we are designing for, especially when it comes to solving a certain problem. So the prototypes are there to help facilitate that so that we can get feedback. When it comes to exploratory projects, it's a little bit harder because even though we are prototyping the things that we are interested in, sometimes we may not know the value of it until much later down the line. So that is why it's so important to have all these prototypes with us in the first place so that we can actually reflect on them and pick out the value that we can use afterwards. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting how even within like product design, there's like two different ways of approaching it. And the points in which you find value are different as well. But I think that's what makes it very diverse.
Okay, so Isabelle, I remember you saying that you were looking at like a social service kind of project.
Right.
So many people will think that design is about designing like products or actually creating business viable type of solutions. But not everyone tends to think of it as like a social service kind of relationship, right? So what is it that you're actually doing, and why do you do it in the first place?
I think it's very normal for people to have that train of thought. I would say that service design, like product design, we also focus a lot on the viability of solutions as well as having that user-centeredness. I think every specialization is like that. But what sets us apart in some form is how much emphasis we really place on like the stakeholders in the entire web of that whole experience. So every system is complex because the people involved and the relationships involved in that system are just as complex. So I really think that every single person has their own unique story to tell. And the interactions they have with other people, they all hold like these nuggets of insights that we as service designers really care about. So what we try to do is we try to tease out those insights, either through sort of mapping out those user journeys with them, playing with sacrificial concepts, getting them to react to things, also co-creation workshops as well. But all of these are ways for us to understand the people in the design. And I feel like when it comes to solutioning, service design is really about tackling a complex issue with a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
So I think I suppose it would be a bit different for product design, but for a service, that's our whole emphasis. And it's really about looking at a very holistic solution. And I think that's why I also like service design and why I chose it. So I personally really like stories. I love people and I really like seeing how they tick and how they think. So this almost felt like the perfect outlet for me to kind of like just dig deep and understand people and get to learn about them. Yeah, and I feel like the best way to approach it for me is also to keep an open mind. It's like how we enter interviews and talk to people while putting our judgments aside and really just trying to understand the root cause behind certain issues. It's really about placing those assumptions aside as well and trying to understand them. So yeah.
So it seems that empathy is really paramount in service design, and it's also quite mandatory for service designers to talk to people. And people can be quite subjective. So how would you measure success in social service design then?
I would say success is built on two layers. So the first layer is very similar to product design, in which we look at the viability of a solution, how innovative is it in that space. But what we really care about as well is the second layer. So that's really about looking at this solution. How isolated is it, or does it play a larger role in sort of influencing all the different moving parts in the system? So it's not something that just exists on its own, but we really see it as a culmination of different factors that impact the whole stakeholder chain in some way. Maybe there's a core user, but I would say that the key to success in service design is really seeing if we not only influence that core user, but all the secondary users involved in that experience. And we look at it in a very holistic way. It can be a very simple solution, but if it covers all bases, I think that's a metric for success. And in terms of how subjective it will be, I would say getting that wide range of people to talk to and engage with your solution is very important. But at the end of the day, the designer has the final say. Yeah.
I do like how practical service design seems and how designers can really bring out a concept from something that is in the studio to maybe a real world context. I think that's really nice.
Yeah. I would say that people are very important. So the design is never just us as designers, but we involve everyone we've talked to, and their voices play a huge part in shaping what intervention we take. So yeah.
I do agree.
Okay, so for you, Sophia, to many people, design features and critical inquiry definitely feels like one of the more abstract specializations. And it kind of has this very enigmatic quality to it. So could you help us unpack what design features is really all about, and why do you pick it yourself?
So I've always immersed myself in the arts, and I wanted to integrate my artistic mindset into my design thinking process. Hence, I chose this specialization because I feel like it gives me the most creative liberty. I like how everything is just uncharted boundaries, be it in a real world context, a conceptualized concept, or just anything in between as well. It really emphasizes a designer's thinking process and whether they are able to challenge the status quo. I believe for designers that are like myself who like more expressive or artistic or installation-driven design, critical inquiry is the best place to develop yourself in.
I feel like it's very interesting how it really taps on the creativity of it. So you really go wild with what you can do. And in some way, it's almost like it's projecting into the future, but in a very informed manner, I'd imagine.
Yeah, exactly. And because of this, there's so many radical ideas that come out of it. So for myself, how I approach this situation is that I do a 50-50 process. The first half is really deep reflection and research, more so to generate an interesting concept. And after that, focusing on hands-on exploration and prototyping to sort of gain clarity and resonance in the idea.
Earlier, you mentioned something about that there tends to be a lot of radicalness in the projects that you guys do. How do you then measure the success values in terms of what you are doing? Because I can imagine that it's quite hard to find references to base off your designs against. So how do you ground that down?
I do agree, unlike service design and product design, where usability and market viability is the important things to measure success. Here in critical inquiry, it's more of a perspective thing, whether a designer is able to shift the perspective in the target audience. I would say that that is what a lot of people in my specialization will also agree on as a successful project. And personally for myself, I also believe that it's the way the designer expresses their concept or idea that allows a general audience to be able to grasp it, because a lot of the critical inquiry explorations seem overly abstract or maybe a bit too artistic. So how does a audience understand the message and whether they are able to understand where the designer is coming from? I think that's one way I would express success.
So would it also mean that how you craft your project to be understood by the audience would be almost paramount to the entire part of your project?
For myself, I'm exploring on material exploration, and I think a way that I would use to express my concept clearly is to use a lot of prototypes, and how I sort of frame my prototype is very important. Since I'm doing a project on ceramic glaze and earthware, then it will be important to put it in a appropriate context, be it a restaurant, a cafe, things that will help people understand the concept better. I think at the end of the day, it's all about leaving a lasting impression. And for us as designers, we can all agree that we just want to create projects that we are proud of, that can either help people or develop ourselves as designers as well.